Thanks for joining us once again for a live post-game edition of Wildcat Country presented by Backcourt Marketing. A business who needs a social media boost, refer them to Backcourt Marketing and get rewarded. Check out backcourtmarketing.com. Here again with Brad Allis, host of the Wildcat Sports Report podcast. Brad, thanks again for joining us. Wish it was after a win, but maybe one of these days we'll get there. My Wildcat Country co-host, Eric Cohen, was at tonight's game. I know he left a little early. Don't blame him. But he sent in some comments. We'll get to those here in a bit. I'll let you take it away, Brad, first. Your overall thoughts from Arizona football's 14th consecutive defeat.
I expected a tough game. I did not expect the automatic win that I think a lot of people were, including some in the media. But I didn't expect this. I didn't expect a blowout that, frankly, Brady Hoke was conservative, or this thing could be 56-14. I know,
Yes.
depending on your feed, I know Arizona's driving. He didn't go for it on a 4th and 1. He kind of let the clock run down on a late in the first half. They settled for the missed field goal. And then there was another time where on 3rd and long inside the red zone, they ran the ball. Now, that might have been a good play because Greg Bell was awesome tonight. But conversely, we knew Arizona would have problems on offense this year. I think we all knew that Gunnar Cruz was a work in progress, that we saw good things last week, but we saw bad things. We knew the line was bad. But until garbage time, and I don't know how many of these guys on San Diego State are their second team. I don't have the depth chart in front of me. I mean, They had 3 first downs going into the fourth quarter. They had about 109 yards. Their best offense has been getting penalized by San Diego State players with 3 personal fouls on 2 drives.
That great horse collar play that they had earlier.
Yeah, that was a great play. The double personal foul. And I think they just had a targeting call, which might help them.
Hey, I'll tell you what, Brad, as of right now, it is a 3-possession game. I'm just saying.
Well, you look for the positives. But yeah, so that's my problem. It's just not only did you get beat up and beat up bad, but you looked inept, especially the defensive stats aren't going to be as bad as the 38 points is going to show, because I think they're going to end up giving up just about 400 yards of total offense. But offensively, they couldn't figure out, or he couldn't figure out how to get an easy completion. I mean, the only easy completion he got were negative yardage. I think there's 4 negative yardage passing plays. So this is just concerning. And even Will Plummer, if you look at his best throw, was an ill-advised throw. It was into double coverage where Cunningham may have even pass interfered a little bit. Although the touchdown toss was nice, although I hate that call. So I think there's some big
I did too.
concerns.
I was amazed it worked.
You were asking if they can beat NAU. I still think they'll beat NAU, but it might be like one of those early stoops where they beat them 28-20 and it's in doubt midway through the fourth. I mean, it's that perilous right now.
I'm glad you brought up Mike Stoops because, and I tweeted this out earlier, you look at it from this perspective. Before the season began, most of us, myself included, figured Arizona would be 0-2 at this point. And maybe some of us thought, okay, San Diego State looks more winnable after the BYU game. I still picked them to lose, albeit in a close game. They're 0-2 like most of us expected. We knew this was going to be a work in progress. And I think some of the promising things we saw last week against BYU gave us the idea that this would be a quicker rebuild than it was always going to be. When you don't have the personnel, you don't have the personnel. The big question for me is, and I got a lot of sarcastic responses to this on Twitter, like I knew I would, what's been the bigger, who's to blame more for this, the players or the coaches? I think certainly it's a combination, but when you don't have a starting quarterback, and I thought Gunnar Cruz did great last week. He just took a big step back. I thought last week he looked more comfortable as the game went on. I think it was the opposite this week. San Diego State, their defense was breathing down his neck. And even when they weren't, and the offensive line picked up the blitz, he still either couldn't find an open guy or was just too timid to throw the ball. I don't know how many passes he threw beyond 5 yards. But when you don't have a valid Power 5 QB1, which I don't think Arizona has at this point. We haven't seen Jordan Mcleod. He really might be our last hope. And you just have an offensive line that just isn't that good. And you had another injury, Donovan Leah going down earlier. I'm not sure if he came back in the game or not. You can come up with all the great schemes you want. And Jed Fish, I still think is going to do well. But there's only so much you can do. So I guess the question I'm getting to in a very long-winded way, Brad, is what – is it more the players in this situation, or is it the coaching staff, or where do you see it going forward?
I mean, I think you have blame on both sides. I agree with you. I think at the end of the day, it's It's just the overall lack of talent. Now, there were some plays that
Yeah.
looked like they sniffed them out and they missed tackles. On one of, I think on Bell's, one of his touchdown runs, the guy met him and then put his head down, and Bell just kind of shrugged off the would be tackle. But there was no one else there to fill in, so I don't know if
Yeah.
that's a scheme thing or what. But if you look at it, they just don't have enough talent across the board, and even with the infusion of transfers, they're still getting second and third tier transfers. I mean, as
Yeah.
much as
Yeah.
they're getting really good players from the MAC, which helps. And I think you could argue that Hayward and Diallo are among their two best defensive players.
Yeah.
And with the exception of Rutherford, who was in the mix sort of at Notre Dame, everyone else was an unproven Power 5 guy. Drake Anderson was about the third running back. Gunnar Maldonado was a reserve safety. Um, Malik Reed, who I haven't seen play much, didn't play last year for Wisconsin. So while they're getting, Gunnar Cruz was never really more than the fourth QB at Washington State, except for an injury game where he ended up being the second string guy. So
Yeah.
yes, you got an infusion of some talent or some guys from good programs or guys who performed at lesser programs, but it's not like you're landing. I'm watching some other games and I forget who had him, but someone had an Alabama transfer and the guy went 80 yards. I think Pitt had an ACC transfer from another ACC school. Even the backup quarterback at San Diego State right now was Georgia Tech starting quarterback at one point. Gunnar Cruz
Right.
again was the third string. So they did bolster, I think, the talent a little bit, but they don't have game-changing transfers yet. There's been speculation that maybe you can go to a Ohio State or a Georgia when you get one of their transfer quarterbacks. That's a bigger deal than getting Jordan Mcleod and Gunnar Cruz. And I'm not ready to completely write off Gunnar Cruz, but has he ever at any point in the now 2.5 games, 3 games, if you count the spring game, that we've seen him look like a Rose Bowl or, frankly, an Arizona Bowl quarterback? No. He's looked competent in the BYU game. He had flashes in the spring game, and he looked utterly awful tonight. Now, they didn't scheme him in a way that could give him some confidence. All the confidence throws were those quick screens, which went for negative yardage. So I'd like to see them maybe try to figure out how to get him what I call a rhythm throw. That's, you're throwing those short throws, but they're picking up, 3 yards here, 4 yards here. I thought when Sonny Dykes was here, although we hate the bubble screen, we hate the wide receiver screen, those kind of can build confidence. We didn't see that tonight. And, so that's a concern. But I think if you're looking at this 84-man roster, I think they have 84 scholarship guys. I think in reality, 30 of them are guys you probably really want long-term, and probably very few of those are guys you want playing on a really good football team.
Yeah, we had some comments on Twitter. Raider1392 brings up a question I really wanted to get to. Asks, is this bad for recruiting? This is something that Adam Gorney, who a national recruiting director for Rivals and Yahoo Sports, he told us on the podcast a few weeks ago. Is no one expects Arizona to be very good right away, and Arizona has recruited well for next year in spite of not having any recent success to show. But Arizona is Adam Gorney's point really was Arizona at least has to show flashes of promise throughout this season in order to get more top guys to come to Tucson. Jed and his staff are off to a heck of a start, like I said, in terms of recruiting. He brought in some 4-star guys. That was unthinkable a year or two ago. But if Arizona looks this bad throughout the rest of the season, it gets that much tougher to pitch recruits on the future of this program. Think about T-Mac from Servite High School, a top wide receiver who was considering Arizona, ultimately decided on Oregon. We were told from Matt Moreno and Adam Gorney and some others that there's still a chance he could change his mind. Well, between Oregon's win over Ohio State today and this game, this debacle in Tucson, did he see anything that would cause him to change his mind? Absolutely not. So Arizona has to win at least a couple games this season. They've got to beat NAU next week, for God's sake. They've got to at least pull off 1 or 2 Pac-12 wins. And in the losses, they have to at least look competitive. They have to look better by the end of the season. They have to play teams tougher going forward, even in losses. If the rest of the season looks more like the BYU game, I can live with that. And I think that's going to at least allow Jed Fish and Brendan Carroll and Don Brown and the whole staff to continue to recruit at the level that they have, which has been pretty good. If it looks more like tonight, that's a problem. Not only for the season, obviously, but for recruiting going forward. I also want to mention, like I said, it might be
Well,
easy to
let me do
blame the
that. I
coaching
think
staff. Go ahead. Go ahead.
the only thing with recruiting is this will show you how good of a salesman they really are. Because right now, if you're a quarterback and if you're an offensive lineman and frankly a defensive back, you can still sell coming here. You can say, well, look, our front seven's okay, and we got wide receivers to throw to, but we just don't have a guy who can throw to him. You can come right in. If you're Noah Fafita, you're sitting there going, yeah, I might play next year. If you're, if you're a JC quarterback looking for a place to play, if you're a transfer, if you're unhappy somewhere, I might be able to go to Arizona. If you're a young offensive, frankly, if you're a JC offensive lineman, I walk right in and I can start right now. But if you're a receiver, if you're T-Mac and you're not in love with Noah Fafita, you're like, well, there's no one who can get me the ball. If you're a running back, you're like, I can't run behind that line. I'm good, but I ain't that good. So that's what I was saying. They have to be good salesmen still. But I do agree with you. I think we need to see more games like BYU because although San Diego State really took their foot off the gas, the first 30 minutes of that game I think is a top 5 in-depth performance of my fandom. I mean, I put it right up there with ASU last year, with a game at Purdue that thankfully I didn't see, but I literally heard Brian Jeffries, the life come out of him on a long bomb at the right at halftime, where I think they went up 35-0 or 42-0, and you could hear him just go, "He's to the 30, the 20, and you heard then color commentator Les Josephson just go, I mean, this was LSU bad in terms of effort, both LSU games. So this was a bad performance. Yes, I totally agree. I just kicked my camera as well. That's not good. But again, we saw BYU looks like a quality football team. They just beat Utah. We're going to beat Utah tonight. Arizona hung with them. Now, someone did put
Go figure.
Great point on Twitter was, well, now there's film on Arizona. And that could be. So, again, if you were proclaiming the future bright last week, you jumped the gun. There were things to look and but if you're also proclaiming today a failure of the Jed Fish era, let's pump the brakes. There's some people in Austin who already think Steve Sarkisian is a failure because of their game today when they thought he was the greatest thing since sliced bread. We don't know. We're 2 games in. There's a chance Arizona can rebound, make this an interesting year. Or this could be the rest of the season, and the Jed Fish doubters are right. We don't know. It's way too early. This is like saying, we lost the game on the second play of the game, which today might have been close, but it's just way too early to proclaim anything. But this is a huge step backwards, and it was just ugly, and there's no spinning that.
Yeah. And I think going back to the Stoops era, overall, I still think of the Mike Stoops era fondly, even though it didn't end well, it didn't begin well, didn't end well, but there were some good times in between. And it wasn't until Mike Stoops' 5th season that Arizona got back to a bowl game. They were competitive in year 3, and they finally got to a bowl in year 5. Now, that's not necessarily the case here. And the thing, too, with college football, Brad, is every game takes on a personality of its own. That's why San Diego State, which had a tough time against New Mexico State, had a tougher time against Arizona. BYU struggles against Arizona, but then beats a Utah team that I would say is much better. Every game it's sort of a quirky sport in that regard. So I think that, the feelings change from week to week. I think Jed Fish's approval rating, if there was one, was like at 5% when he was first hired, probably closer to 90% before the season started. And now it's probably way back down. But it changes week to week. I want to get a couple comments that Eric Cohen, my co-host of Wildcat Country, who was at the game and is on his way back on the I-10 right now, maybe almost all the way back, said he thought the offensive line, the offensive game plan, he thought was terrible. They can't run, so why try? Although Matt Scott, former Arizona quarterback, said Jed Fish is actually notorious for giving up on the run. So he played for Jed Fish at Jacksonville. So take that for what it's worth. Eric also said, why is Gunnar Cruz not on the shotgun more often with this terrible offensive line? I think that's a fair question. On defense, I blame the players. Horrendous tackling. I agree with that. And Gunnar Cruz's decision-making has been atrocious. I agree with that as well. So here's a question that Eric posed. What's the attendance look like next week? It was 39,000 for this game, which all things considered wasn't bad. They
I
get
thought it would
30
be
next
better.
week. What do you think? Yeah.
They'll sell 30,
Yeah.
but they won't
Well,
have no. No, it'll be bad. It'll be sparse, I think. Maybe some NAU fans will come out.
Maybe, yeah. And I applaud Jed Fish's efforts to drive up attendance. He's done everything humanly possible, in the offseason to this point to get fans to come out, visiting fraternities, getting, Gronk and Teddy Bruschi to come back, setting the world record, getting that on national TV on Thursday Night Football was fantastic. You can add all the bells and whistles you want at the stadium, new traditions, the Tucson towels, a DJ, you serve beer and wine in the stadium now, all that stuff. The only thing that's going to bring fans out is winning football games. It's not going to change until Arizona football fans, Brad, I think, behave very much the same way that Valley sports fans do. They'll turn out when the teams win, and they'll turn out in force, but not before then. It's just the way it is. This is not men's basketball. It's a different story. With football, the wins have to come before the fans do. It's unfortunate that it works that way, and I agree with Jed Fish's point that, well, if you come out, then we'll have a better chance to win. It's just not the reality of the situation. And, you think about it, a sellout at a football game, and Arizona Stadium is great when it sells out. We're still old enough to remember, some of those games. But that includes by nature, a sellout includes by definition, people snatching up all the nosebleed seats. After what happened tonight and what's happened the last couple of years, do you want to sit in a nosebleed seat in an Arizona football game? The only way you're going to get people to come out is to pay for those seats is the promise, or at least the likelihood they'll see a competitive game. That's all there is to it.
No, someone said, and this was about a decade ago, and I think it was my good old radio colleague, Tailgate Nate. Nate Rady, who's a teacher here in town, he said there's probably about 30,000 diehard U of A football fans, and 27,000 of them will show up regardless. And I'm not sure it's 30,000 now, because I think, unfortunately, some of them died off, and some of them just became women's basketball fans, or you name the sport. But there's probably, win or lose, you're going to get somewhere around 30,000. You're going to get students who come out because that's what you do in college. And especially if you're not going to hit the bars or frat rows. So if you're an 18-year-old who lives in the dorm and you're not in a fraternity, you'll go to the game. But they're going to be hard pressed to match the student crowd they had tonight, unless it was just a blast. And I don't know. It was always fun for me. I went to every game and I stayed and I didn't leave. And frankly, even when I could drink, I didn't, because I was breaking down defenses even back then. But you're going to be hard pressed because, again, we're in the era now where it's more expensive. The home product is better. Now, granted, I had a lot of trouble with my feed tonight for the Pac-12 network, but when 20 years ago, when the game was on whatever channel, KMSB, tape delayed at 10:30, and you're watching it on your UHF channel with the clicky thing, and your little brother's holding the rabbit ears, that's a lot different than watching high def on my 55-inch TV that I can go get for like $120. It's just a different experience now. And the games are about 4 hours, so you have to put a great product on the field. And even when let's remember, even when Rich Rod was winning 10 games, there were a lot of 45,000s. There weren't, Stoops was the last guy where you could just say, come out for a good experience, and we're going to get 50,000. I mean, if Rich Rod couldn't. I think they got 50,000 twice in the Fiesta Bowl year, and that was fun football.
The ASU game, I believe, was sold out, and then I think the year after that, when College Game Day came, they played UCLA, even though that game did not go well. I want to say that game was sold out as well.
And I think there were a couple others mixed in, but frankly, with the product you were getting under Rich Rod, which was always entertaining, you should have had bigger crowds than you did. But that's just the nature of, I think, of college sports now. Unless you're just, they were even talking. Alabama has trouble selling student tickets. I mean, if you're not going to Alabama, where are you going? So it's just a different animal right now, and Arizona's particularly tough. Now, I will say this: Jed Fish did a great job. He should continue doing a good job, because that shows Tucson he cares. He did more this week to get the frat houses out than Sumlin did in 3 years to get all of us out. I mean, after that first month where Sumlin went to, I think it was it Warner Smith's funeral, and then did something else with the alumni, and then he dropped off the face of the earth.
Hmm.
Jedd Fisch appears to be marketing wise in it for the long haul. And I know some people have been critical of that. Well, why were you on frat row and not game plan? Well, you need the fans because right now that doesn't just help football. That's actually helping the athletic department. You got an athletic department which is hurting for money, and Jedd Fisch is making money for the athletic department. So I have no problem with that. But agree with you. At the end of the day, you're going to be somewhere between 35 and 40,000 unless you start winning football games, and even then, you're going to have to win a few in a row to crack that 50,000.
Yeah, and I don't want to make it sound like Jedd Fish is wasting his time because he's absolutely not. I think he's doing a great job. I just think that the reality is the wins are going to have to come before the fans do. A couple comments on YouTube. Gorilla Tech says we need a run option type quarterback. Plummer may be able to do it. Some RPO will help this offensive line. And he's just also doing a spread offense just because quarterbacks don't have much time to throw. Let me ask you. Well, actually, before I get to this, I want to ask you about Jordan Mcleod. But before that, any positives from this game other than the punter that maybe Arizona can build on for next week?
I do think defensively they settled down. I know again some of it San Diego State getting tentative. I think if you're going to grade, Will Plummer seemed to settle down a little bit. Again, I think those are a lot of second string guys by San Diego State. I think the effort remained the entire game or most of the game. So yeah, but they're
Yeah.
few and far between. As for the quarterbacks, I think you got to boot your quarterbacks. I think actually Cruz can move a little bit.
Yeah.
Plummer can
Yeah.
obviously move a little bit. So the other thing I'd like to see, and again, I don't know enough. I haven't figured out Jedd Fisch's playbook. Like I'm still trying to figure out someone's. I finally figured out Rich Rod's. But can you add more elements of the West Coast offense with those the short passes, but not those screens parallel to the line of scrimmage? I want 5 yard outs. I want quick comeback routes. I want slants. Let's go to the Bill Walsh playbook before we go to the McVay playbook. And again, you implement all that stuff. Would I like to see a read option package with Mcleod? Maybe. He showed a few things at South Florida, but he really was okay. Heck, at this point, line up Stanley Berryhill and the Wildcat 3 times a game because he's the biggest gamer on offense. I mean, he had I think a 25-yard run today. He had a 47-yard touchdown. You might have to get gimmicky here a little bit, just even if it's just to keep guys honest on defense, because they were really able to, for the most part, pin back their ears and go after the Arizona quarterback. I think they only got the 4 sacks, but Plummer got belted a couple times. I
Yeah.
tend to agree a little bit with Matt Scott. Yeah, you got to keep with the run, even if it's draw play, even if we haven't seen a jet sweep yet. I'd love to see a jet sweep Tavian Cunningham with his speed. Um, just enough to keep him on. Design quarterback run, which you're probably not doing with Gunnar Cruz, but you might be able to do with Will Plummer. Just enough where they can't just they're throwing 50 times, so we're coming 50 times. If they break off a run, so be it. Because frankly, Arizona just couldn't do it.
The only real criticism I have of Jedd Fish at this point is I feel like his play calling has been a bit unimaginative, and which surprises me because, and I mentioned this on our show on Wednesday. We had Wilton Spade on a few months ago. Wilton is, I'm sure you know, Brad was he played for Jedd Fish at Michigan, and Wilton Spade just raves about Jedd Fish and his play calling and being a brilliant offensive mind, and how after a big win they had, Jedd Fish was up all night creating like 20 more new plays for the next game and getting Wilton back in his office in the very next morning to talk about him. So that surprises me a little bit that he hasn't opened things up. Maybe he's getting, it's a feeling out process. He still needs to know what he has with this team and what he doesn't have with his team. But despite tonight's debacle, that's my only criticism at this point, considering the personnel they have. As far as Jordan Mcleod, what you touched on, you mentioned Gunnar Cruz was never close to being a starting quarterback in Washington State. Well, Jordan Mcleod was a starting quarterback, and he had a little success here and there at South Florida. The fact that he's number 3 on the depth chart behind these two guys, what do you make of that? And if Arizona has takes care of business next week against NAU, I know it's hard to imagine right now, but if they do, say they're up big, do you want to see some Jordan Mcleod in the third or fourth quarter?
Yeah, and what I want to see is I know the knock on Mcleod is he doesn't know the offense, but maybe what you need to do, and I've said College is a little bit different than the pros, where the pros is you bring in free agents that fit your scheme. College is you fit your scheme to your personnel until you get 2 or 3 recruiting classes in. So maybe you just come up with a Jordan Mcleod playbook, and maybe it's 5 plays you run out of 5 formations, so it looks like 25 plays. The old Norm Chow. Norm Chow ran 5 plays, but he ran 55 formations, and it was a complex playbook. I don't know how realistic that is. A lot of that would depend on how good of a learner Jordan Mcleod is. Um, but that would be something I'd be interested in seeing myself, especially if Cruz continues to struggle next week. Because I don't think Plummer's the guy long term. I think Cruz
Yeah, I
has
don't either.
outside possibility, but even then, after tonight, I'm not optimistic. Before we criticize Jed Fish's play calling, first of all, we don't have the all 22 film. And frankly, we're not in the stadium, you and I, so we can't see everything. We don't know what was downfield and missed. We
Yeah.
also, football has advanced so much, and so many fans, it's weird that they don't know this, but so much of what is designed is pre-snap read and post-snap read. It's not like where you used to call a pass play and you had 3 checkdowns and that was it, and you could audible into a run. There are times where, and my brother who played some college football pointed this out a long time ago. He used to swear that Trey Griffey, it took him a half to figure out the post-snap reads. Because if you remember,
Hmm.
he averaged like half a catch per first half and like 5 in the second half. So
Right.
much of it is you get this coverage with this play, and I'm supposed to run because when I played, and again that's 30 years ago when I played, and I played at a low level. We're talking lower level high school. You ran, they call play X, you ran a 5 and out. That's all you ran. You did not adjust. Depended on press coverage, whatever. It's evolved since then. Now it's evolved so much that post snap, you're changing your route. So we don't know if guys are running the wrong route. Cruz is looking for the wrong route. The adjustments by the coaches post snap, pre snap are wrong. So we just don't know yet. Again, by the end of the Stoops era, I knew what I knew what they were trying to run. I felt pretty comfortable with the rich rod, where I could tell you based on how many guys in the box what Anu was going to check down into. With someone I could never figure it out because I don't know what they wanted Khalil Tate to do. I still don't know what was Khalil Tate's problem, and I don't know what Jed Fish is doing yet. So before I'm ready to say he's calling bad plays, it may be Cruz is making the wrong reads on plays. It may mean that
Yeah.
not everyone's
Yeah.
on the same page, and that maybe Jed Fish has the right play called, but they don't execute it right. Or maybe it's what everyone thinks. No, these are awful play calls. He's just out. He doesn't know what he's doing yet, and I just don't know. So before I'm ready to throw Jed Fish under the bus or Gunnar Cruz or the 5 receivers, let's see how this playbook develops. Let's see what they're asking. Let's hear some more press conference quotes where maybe Rich Rod was really good about letting you know because he was so proud of that offense. Where other
Yeah.
guys are more secretive about their offense, and so we'll find out. I'm also think I'm going to watch a lot of Rams games this year to see what they're running, because I'm curious to see how much of it Arizona's running and how much maybe Arizona wants to run in the future. I just have to fit them in around my Chief games.
That's fair enough. And it's fantastic points too about the play calling as well. Before we go, I want to just get a quick roundup of the Pac-12 because it's just college football is so unpredictable. Oregon comes back after a shaky game against Fresno State at home last week and beats Ohio State on the road. Colorado, I know A&M's quarterback went out early in that game, but they almost pulled off the upset over number 5 Texas A&M. Stanford just finished routing, or they're almost finished routing USC. ASU, I think they finally pulled away against UNLV, but that was close for 3 quarters. So what's your overall take? 2 weeks in, or I guess like 2+ week 0 into Pac-12 play. What's your overall take on how good this conference is compared to previous years overall?
I don't think it's a whole lot different than it's been the past few years. I think it's good, not great. My guess is when it shakes out, Oregon is going to be the class of the league. My
Yeah.
guess is, UCLA is going to be better than we thought. I don't think, even though I don't think LSU is what they've been, I think that's still a really good win because they still have athletes. They have 75 athletes that we would all kill for. I think at the end of the day, Washington's worse than we thought, and I wasn't as high on Washington as a lot of people. Um, the team that puzzles me a little bit is Cal. They've been in now 2 close games against okay teams, but have not found ways to win.
Yeah.
The perplexing one to me is Stanford because they looked awful against what I think is a pretty average K-State. Now, that's a tough game. Going cross country, playing early, that's a tough first one
Yeah,
against,
but Oregon
a
did that against
lackluster team.
Ohio State, the 9 a.m. local start and took care of business there. So
Yeah,
I don't know how
yeah,
much of an
and
excuse you can make it.
no, but again, Oregon had a game under their belt. But
Yeah.
and USC didn't look great against San Jose State, but they look good. So again, at the end of the day, if I was power ranking it right now, it's Oregon 1, UCLA 2, and by default ASU 3. And
Yeah.
from there, it's kind of a jumbled mess. And I think you put Arizona now at 10 or 11, and you put Washington at 12. But other than that, yeah, it's a tough league. I was ready to maybe give Arizona an extra win or two, up from 2 to maybe 4 this year. I'm ready to backtrack on that. Although I think, again, I think they can play with Colorado. Although that Colorado defense looked really good, their offense was inept,
Yeah.
and their play calling was bizarre. Washington looks pretty mediocre, but again, those they probably have more talent than Arizona. So I think at the end of the day, yeah, we're probably still looking at 2 or 3, and you just wonder how competitive they're going to be in those losses. And if they lose next week, then yeah, then the sky is falling because
Yeah.
although we all like the little brother to the north, they don't compete very often.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, gosh, yeah, the NAU game, I don't, you have to find a way to win that game. No doubt about it. And I think that my expectations for the season really haven't changed through 2 weeks. I thought this was going to be a work in progress. I thought they looked better than I thought they would against BYU. They looked worse tonight. Maybe it kind of evens out. I don't think they're as bad as they showed tonight by any means. I don't think they were as good as they should have. And I didn't think, I thought, well, maybe BYU's not that good. Then they go off and beat Utah. It's just college football is crazy. So,
What puzzled me tonight is I thought if San Diego State was going to win this game, it would be 28-14, but they just grinded out.
yeah,
5-minute
that was going to
drive,
be ugly.
7 minute. I don't know what it finished. I know the first 4 touchdown drives, the longest one was 350. And there were 2 under 2 minutes. I mean, it was quick strike, and that surprised me. Again, I thought it was going to be Bell for 6, Bell for 7, hit the tight end for 5, convert
Hmm.
on 3rd down, can't get off the field. And it was Bell for what, 70 something? It was the tight end for 70 and then score 2 plays later. It was the other long pass. So that's what surprised me. And then just how Arizona, I thought, yeah, maybe we'd see Arizona move the ball, but get stuck between the 20s. And it was just, yeah, in reality, it was 1 or 2 good plays by Arizona. It was about 7 good plays for San Diego State. But the fact that they didn't grind out, they still averaged 6 yards per carry. But I thought it was going to be the time of possession death by inches, and it really wasn't. So credit San Diego State for making big plays and for after a horrendous first half against a bad New Mexico State team, just basically playing 6 dominant quarters of football.
Yeah, yeah. The real San Diego State team is obviously the one that we saw the second half of that game against New Mexico State. Eric and I will make our predictions for the NAU game and our podcast coming up this week. Brad, let's get early prediction from you, or at least an early analysis. How do you expect next week's game against NAU to go based on what we saw tonight?
And I don't know what NAU has really done, so I need to learn a little bit more about them.
Me too.
But my guess is, I think Arizona should win the game. I think Arizona should figure it out. I'd like to see them try to get an early score, something they have not really been able to do these past 2 games. Even if it's a gimmick play, maybe it's a trick play on the opening kickoff. But I think I think Arizona's just going to have trouble scoring a lot of points this year. So I could see it being a 28-14 game, a 28-10 game. I could see it being something. And again, Stoops had one of these, 2 of these, I think, where they went in the 4th quarter. And I think they actually trailed one of them, like in year 2 or 3 in the 4th quarter. I could see it being like that and them pulling away because they have more talent at the end. But what I thought was, yeah, we all thought this was the gimme. And I said, my hope was they could be 2-1 after 3, but they'd probably be 1-2. Well, now you're praying for 1-2.
Yep.
My
Yeah.
dog is also pulling on the cord now, so.
It's fine. So, and I say this as an eternal pessimist. I actually think Arizona is going to be fine next week. I think they're going to take care of business. I think they're going to get at a lot of frustration. The only thing that I don't want to see, well, than the loss, I don't want to see is fans rushing the field if they win, like Kansas did when they beat the FCS school and ended their big losing streak. I hope we don't see that. I just saw BYU fans rush the field after beating Utah. I know that was a bit of an upset, but it's. I know. I
That's a
think the
rivalry
bar
game,
for.
though. They don't like each other.
I know, but I feel like the bar for rushing the field keeps getting lower. Maybe it's just because people couldn't go to games last year and they're making up for it, whatever. But
It's
anyway,
just like rushing the court in basketball. Yeah.
right. No, I get it, but Arizona fans, if Arizona beats NAU, and I certainly hope it happens, please don't rush the field. We don't want another Lawrence, Kansas situation. Anyway, thanks, Brad, for joining us. We appreciate it again.
It was Washington, number 1 Washington back in the
that
90s.
that was in 03 after they
no, we're talking in the 90s when I was in school.
Oh, okay. That was like when they beat like number 1 Washington.
Not number 1 Washington. Yeah, they beat them, and I did go on the field for that one. That's the only time I've been on the field when I didn't have a media credential. And that was the number 1 team in the country.
You beat the top team in the country. That's totally fine. But anyway, that we're kind of at a different spot now. But anyway, Brett, thanks again for joining us. Check out the Wildcat Sports Report podcast on. Tell everyone where they can find the podcast, Brett.
Yeah, you can find it basically on the 3 major podcasting services. I like Spotify the best right now because somehow Apple's getting funky, but it's on Apple, it's on Google. Just look up either Wildcat Sports Report podcast or my name, Brad Allis. I'm going to have a Lute Olson, some reflection stuff. I think that'll probably go up Monday or Tuesday. I have a couple fun stories from watching Lute on the recruiting trail, and in fact, I had breakfast with Lute once. Which was the most if anyone's been on,
I want to hear about that.
If anyone's been on a date with someone they know is like much prettier than you are attractive, and I've been on a few of those because look at this face. Most girls are more attractive. I was more nervous. Lute, I scrutinized what I was going to eat. I let him order first, and he couldn't have been nicer and just the gentleman that you see. He always was when I dealt with him. I was fortunate when I worked for Cat Tracks magazine that we had a weekly interview one-on-one with Lute that I got to go on to a few times, and it was just always a pleasure dealing with him. The guy you saw was usually the guy you saw. I mean, he was a pretty genuine guy. So have a few stories. My favorite one I think that I want to tell because he wore almost identical shirt is also Lute and Roy Williams comparing Italian shoes at a recruiting event while recruiting 5-star players.
I'm not being facetious. I am definitely going to listen to that because I'm very curious. I remember real quick when I worked at the Daily Wildcat as a assistant sports editor. I remember whenever we needed a quote from Arizona or needed a comment, we'd always go to Josh Pastner. Lute would always refer to Josh Pastner as his mouthpiece, I guess, during that time. But anyway, definitely check out.
Let me tell you a quick Josh story because this isn't going in the podcast.
Yep.
So I had a young writer. He was a college student. He's now a lawyer in Chicago. Josh was the student assistant. He had graduated, but wasn't the full-time grad assistant yet. And I get a phone call, and my buddy is playing intramurals at Bear Down Gym, and they're losing because the team's at a 2-3 zone. He's like, do you think I could call Josh and ask him how to break the zone? And I'm like, let me text him. And this was flip phone texting. So I text him. Josh is like, sure, call. So the guy calls him, and he had dealt with Josh a few times. And sure enough, Josh broke down how to beat the zone, and his team won on a last-second shot because the ball reversal and all that. So Josh Pastner helped this guy's intramural basketball team break the 2-3 zone and win their intramural game. So that's kind of one of those where, yes, people in the media, we don't have a lot of money, but we have some connections, and it may not make us rich or famous, but hey, it can win. Yeah. It can win a pre-law student his intramural game because you can make that call at halftime.
All about relationships, man. I know it from my experience as well. All right, Brad, thanks again for joining us. Brad Allis with Wildcat Sports Report podcast. Eric, drive safe. We'll see you back here on the podcast here in a couple of days. Thanks to our sponsor, Backcourt Marketing. Go to backcourtmarketing.com for all your social media needs for your company. If you know a company that needs some good social media marketing, refer them to Backcourt Marketing and get rewarded. For Brad Allis and Eric Cohen, I'm Shane Dale. And since Eric's not here, I'll say it despite the loss, bear down.